Good evening, and welcome to the Master Gardener program on sustainable landscapes in a changing climate. I'm Dina Henson, branch manager at Middleburg Library, and your host tonight. Please feel free to use the chat feature to send me your comments and questions during the program, and I will relay them to Angie during and after the program. Angie Patterson is an environmental educator, plant ecophysiologist, and science communicator, known as the shotgun scientist for her work in studying how trees respond to climate change. Specifically, she has examined how temperature affects the physiology of trees in northeastern U.S. forests. Angie received her bachelor's in natural resources from Cornell University and her master of philosophy and doctorate in plant ecophysiology from Columbia University. Her research and science communication efforts have been profiled in publications such as The Guardian, The Forestry Source, Cell Press, and the National Environmental Education Foundation. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Should I get started? All right.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much for inviting me to share with you a topic that's very important to me and one that always spurs more questions than answers at the end of every discussion. So what I find most interesting about this topic of plant responses and climate change is how resilient our forests can be, especially with intentional and concerted efforts being made towards preserving the biodiversity of our ecosystems. So with that, I'm very excited to speak with you about how plants are responding to our changing climate and what might we consider when we want to build sustainable landscapes. I think it's important to recognize that there are many types of gardens that serve many different purposes. Although gardens or other green spaces are inherently better than industrial spaces when it comes to thwarting climate change, it's the practice of cultivation and caretaking of the land that can either be sustainable and foster a healthier environment, or can make the land depauperate of the benefits we receive from them. And of course, my research background is contextualized in understanding how our naturally occurring forests will respond to a changing climate. But its conclusions can extend to more cultivated landscapes, since general patterns can be seen in plant responses to increasing temperatures. Before we can talk about what we need to consider about creating climate resilient gardens and cultivated lands, I want to zoom out and talk about how our climate is changing through the lens of a plant ecophysiologist. So first, I'll be introducing you to the carbon cycle and the role forests play in that cycle. Then I'll present some of the factors that influence our forest carbon fluxes. I'll briefly discuss how trees are responding to climate change, showcasing some global and local observations. I'll then introduce you to my research, exploring tree physiological responses to temperatures and how we can make positive changes to thwart climate change. And then I'll present a couple of case studies of how our conservationists are creating sustainable landscapes, including what you might be able to do to help. And finally, we'll end the presentation with questions and perhaps learn more from each other on what we've been observing and sharing practices that have worked or may not have worked. Before we can explore how plants will be impacted under a changing climate, we have to understand how carbon is cycling globally. So in this schematic of the global carbon cycle, we can see various sources of CO2, such as fossil fuels or cement production, soil and plant respiration, land use changes, and oceans. And the carbon sinks, or the places where atmospheric carbon is stored, lies in our oceans, as well as in green spaces through the process of photosynthesis. So there's a lot of carbon dioxide that's going into the trees, oceans, and earth, and a lot actually going out into the atmosphere. And this exchange of gases to and from the earth, which we call carbon fluxes, can sometimes not add up and isn't showing balance. So plants and forests are an important place to look to see if we can account for some of this missing carbon. So how much CO2 can forests offset? Scientists determined that temperate forests, such as forests typical to those in the northeastern United States region of the world, as well as tropical forests, are actually large sinks for CO2. And that over the span of 20 years or so, temperate forests have increased their ability to store carbon dioxide by about 33%, while tropical forests have actually declined theirs due to things like deforestation, where they cut down large areas of trees. And reasons as to why temperate forests can remain a large sink or storage place for carbon dioxide is due to increased growth of our forest after the reduction of large-scale farming, cow grazing, and wood harvesting. And in addition, the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, as well as nitrogen, an important element that's needed for plants to grow, has also increased, which has led to increased plant biomass and land area for growth. Using canopy level carbon flux measurements and satellite data, researchers estimated that 20% of US carbon emissions come from the Northeast, and that if the Northeast was actually a country, it'd be tied for 5th place as emitting the most CO2 into the atmosphere. However, the temperate forests of the Northeast can offset up to 40% of US carbon emissions annually, which highlights the contribution this region's forest has on mitigating climate change. So to understand how forest carbon dynamics may change under a warmer climate, we need to understand how plants are cycling carbon and determine if they will be able to acclimate or adapt their physiology to optimal levels, ensuring physiological competitiveness that is needed to survive, grow, and reproduce. So the physiological processes that will dictate this is photosynthesis, in which plants take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the soil, and use light energy from the sun to produce sugars that's needed for them to grow and oxygen that's required for us to breathe. And it's through respiration, which is the opposite of photosynthesis, where plants can actually break down the sugars they produced by using oxygen and metabolic energy to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy that is needed to power photosynthesis and sustain a tree's growth, reproduction, and repair. So for plants, photosynthesis and respiration are tightly linked and can't happen without the other. So the processes of photosynthesis and respiration go hand in hand, but they can be influenced by a number of environmental factors, such as nitrogen supply, soil moisture, light, and stand age that can influence the rate of photosynthesis. And respiration depends on things like soil environment, leaf area, photosynthetic rate. However, the rates of both of these processes are also dependent on temperature and can actually differ depending on the type of species that's operating those processes. So let's take a look at how temperature has changed in the northeastern US. So over the last 126 years, the average annual temperatures in the northeastern US has become much warmer. And this graph on the bottom shows the departure of the average annual temperatures from the 20th century average over time. And if we were to draw a trend line across the last 100 years or so, we'd find that temperatures have risen about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit over that time period. And if we look closely more at the latter years, the warming has increased at a faster rate of about 0.5 degree Fahrenheit per decade. And of course, you'll see on the graph that there are interannual variability where some years are cooler than others. But over the last decade or two, the departure from the mean has been consistently above the century average. In Western Massachusetts, the 2024 summer temperatures have departed from the century average by about 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit alone. And I can definitely attest to feeling it this summer. Scientists have also observed and come to understand that plants have always moved or migrated to environments that are best suited for them. And this has been happening ever since the last ice age ended over 11,000 years ago. But because the climate is changing over the land in every part of the world and doing so very fast, plants are having a hard time keeping up. And in fact, scientists think that they need to migrate up to 10 times faster than they did before in order to be successful. In addition, the percentage of species that's committed to extinction based on maximum climate warming for the year 2050 is estimated to be between 20 to 50%, depending on the ability for tree species to disperse or migrate to new areas. So, without the help of humans to actively migrate plants to better areas with suitable climates, we ask, how will plants respond to this rapid change in air temperature if they were to stay right where they are? Well, you're probably asking, wait, plants can actually move or migrate? Well, I'll let you judge for yourself. Hopefully, if the video could play. Well, that's too bad. Guess it's not playing right. Oh, there it is. Here it goes. It's taking a little bit to load. Uh-oh. Here we go. Or it might not play.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Oh, no. We're having something happened. 1 second. Looks like it's reloading.
Momentary tech pause.
Always something. Okay, well, I will keep going. It was a video. See if it'll actually go. It's a video of the Lord of the Rings where you see the March of the Ents.
Oh,
Um, but it's okay. We know that that's not real. Trees actually can't move like animals do. They don't have legs and are instead sessile organisms. So, how do they actually migrate? Well, they depend on seed dispersal or the movement of their seeds in order to successfully establish themselves and reproduce to ensure a thriving population. So, some other observations that scientists have seen include and that have been well documented include the lengthening of a plant's growing season. And we all know that plants grow during the year when it's the perfect temperature and length of daylight for them to photosynthesize or use the sun's energy to grow. However, with the temperatures outside getting warmer year after year, scientists are noticing that the growing season for plants is becoming longer, and the flowers that plants produce for successful reproduction are opening up earlier. Scientists are also seeing a migration where species ranges are either shifting or contracting and or expanding, but the migration patterns generally aren't resulting in plants just moving anywhere. We're finding that plants are moving or migrating northward, like towards Canada or up mountains, which are cooler and less stressful than where the plants are now. So let's take a look at this photo. Scientists took photos of a mountainside in Sweden near the Arctic tree line as depicted by these black lines on the bottom photo. And these tree lines mark the boundary where conditions inhibit the growth of shrubs and trees. In 1977, you can notice on the top that the shrubs ceased to pass this line. However, as the climate conditions become more favorable, shrubs and trees have expanded their range and moved upward towards mountains. So this article came out spring 2024 about the changes Vermonters will encounter when they go to choose what plants to grow. The 2023 USDA plant hardiness zone map is about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the 2012 map across the contiguous United States, with about half of the country moving into a warmer hardiness zone. So a lot of these changes were attributed to methods in averaging data sources, but also our change in climate had an impact in shifting these zones northward. So generally, how will plants respond to climate change? Well, trees can respond in one of three ways. They can either persist, migrate to suitable habitat, or become extirpated from the local region. So here we can see that under different emission scenarios, the temperatures of New York State could actually start to feel like temperatures that would occur as far south as Georgia. So in my presentation, you'll hear me reference New York State due to where my research took place, but you could imagine the same scenarios and questions being asked in reference to where you are. So in regards to questions, three important ones actually rose to the top as I began contemplating the changes that would happen in forests where I studied. I started to ask, what would happen to these New York trees, which aren't used to Georgia temperatures? Will the forests in Georgia begin to migrate up to New York? And what species will be able to survive there? Of course, for plants, the first line of defense is to persist, which requires species to be long living, have high stress tolerances, and produce dormant seeds. And these traits describe the northern red oak, which is one of the most dominant tree species in the New York region. Its range is actually located in the region where I studied, and are able to tolerate a range of temperatures that occur in the warmer regions of the South and the cooler regions of the North. Projections on abundance, however, and habitat actually suggest that certain areas will lose abundance while northern areas increase abundance and suitable habitat while still being able to maintain its full range. Carya glabra, or pignut hickory, is a southern range species whose northern edge hits the Hudson Highlands region of New York. As temperatures become warmer, its predicted abundance and range is noted not only to expand, but extend northward. And there have been projections of species range shifts, such as the one shown here for paper birch. Southern individuals of paper birch used to occur in the southern New York forests, with a higher abundance occurring northwards into Canada. However, this model predicts that paper birch is going to decrease in abundance in the current areas while being actually moving completely out of this region. A study published in 2008 by collaborators at Black Rock Forest in the Hudson Highlands region of New York summarized these changes in forest composition over the span of 76 years. And in total, they found that 3 tree species became locally extinct or were extirpated from the forest, and 11 had migrated in from the south, either naturally or anthropogenically. The species that had minimal abundance and became extirpated include the northern range species of black spruce and paper birch. Dutch elm's disease was a fungal disease that eradicated most of the living American elm trees, which had a central range distribution in this part of the nation. And all the way to the right, showing 2 out of the 11 southern range tree species that have migrated in, which have been included as study samples in my research. Here are a few more southern range trees that are also found in the forest. We have American sycamore, red mulberry, pignut hickory, black gum, and tree of heaven, or Ailanthus altissima, which is non-native to North America. So what are the consequences, or what consequences can come about if trees from differing climatic provenances experience temperature regimes they may not be adapted to? So this schematic shows what could happen if populations experience a mismatch with future climate. On the left, on the left picture, we have some blue trees that are currently living in the colder climates that they've adapted to, while yellow trees are living under warmer climates that they've adapted to, with green trees living somewhere in the middle of that range. And with climate change, we can expect to get a mismatch between the genotypes of populations and the climate that they find themselves in as the cold environment becomes warm and the warm environment becomes hot. The gray trees in the schematic represent mortality or health problems associated with a maladaptation to the new climate that they're experiencing. So we know that as climate becomes warmer, the physiological responses of trees experiencing a new temperature regime that they've not adapted to can result in tree migration or mortality events that lead to species replacement and changes in their region's carbon storage potential. So for example, oaks have been around northeastern United States forests for thousands of years. And since the ending of large-scale agriculture over 200 plus years ago, they've become the dominant tree species. We know that their long-term persistence is due to their inherent physiological and physical traits once they've established and matured, and their dominance and regrowth of our forests has helped make this region a carbon sink. Unfortunately, we also know that oaks are threatened by a number of factors that affect their ability to successfully recruit and establish new oaks in the forest. And these include a loss due to periodic disturbances, such as lightning strikes or ice storms that damage or kill oaks in the overstory. Also, an absence of fires has allowed for fire-sensitive species to compete with understory oaks, which have poor physiological performance compared to red maple and black birch. And of course, one of the largest threats include deer browsing, which has drastically inhibited oak regeneration, making it easier for migrant and other introduced species to fill that oak's vacant niche. So the replacement of oaks by introduced or migrant tree species may not only reduce a set of important ecosystem services that oaks provide, but can negatively influence the carbon storage capacity of this forest, potentially changing the forest from a sink of CO2 to a source of CO2, which further perpetuates warmer atmospheric temperatures. So, as a plant ecophysiologist, I wanted to ask these sets of questions. Why are trees migrating in and out of black rock forest? Is it because the climate is too warm for some and better for others? Is it because some trees are growing faster than others via the processes of photosynthesis and respiration? And how is this connected with where these trees originally came from, whether they're historically northern trees or southern trees or central to the study? But before we can answer these questions, we need to understand how these trees grow, how climate change can affect that. So to understand more about how the trees in New York will fare under a warming climate, I set forth to conduct research at Black Rock Forest, which I stated is in the Hudson Highlands region of New York, which is approximately about 1.5 hours north of New York City. It's about 4,000 acres that is predominantly oak, and it's a great place to do this type of work due to the long-term research on species replacement over the last 90 years. And it's also a site where we see these tree range distributions overlap. So luckily for me, I had no shortage of recruiting volunteers to help collect branch samples that I used in my study. Using the shotgun method, we were able to retrieve canopy tree branches growing in full sunlight to reduce variation in the physiological response of these sampled leaves. Producers from The Verge Science came to Black Rock Forest to interview me about my work and showcase how I collected my samples, and I'd love to share that with you today.
This race is on display in Black Rock Forest, just north of New York City, where for years, Angie has been keeping tabs on the movement of tree species, including the northern red oak.
Very important tree species in this forest because it makes up about 70% of the forest composition.
As the climate shifts, new trees are also moving in, and the future of the red oak and the whole forest is uncertain.
So I'm comparing the physiological responses to temperature of trees in order to see if there's a physiological mechanism that's driving tree migration.
To learn how Black Rock's trees respond to changing temperatures, Angie needed leaves.
You want to make sure that you have a clean shot because believe me, I've had plenty of leaves with holes in it.
For Angie, the best leaves to study were all the way at the top of the canopy because they get a consistent and even amount of sunlight.
So we're going to want to go to the branch towards the middle there, right in that open space.
But those leaves are really hard to get to, hence the heavy weaponry.
The shotgun was actually a very efficient and cheap way to collect my samples.
Over the course of 3 years, Angie used her shotgun to collect leaves from 23 tree species, including the red oak.
Fire!
Using a device called a lycor, she subjected the leaves to different temperatures and CO2 levels and measured their photosynthesis and respiration.
Covering the chamber completely.
Basically, she wanted to see how each of the species would respond to different swings in the climate.
And then I compared their photosynthetic rates and respiration rates as temperatures increase.
She found that the red oak and some other trees are at a real disadvantage compared to other trees that are moving in, meaning the red oaks could be displaced.
Okay, so that's just a little snippet of some of the research that I did. So as certain populations of tree species become less resilient to a changing climate, many scientists and forest managers are debating the actions that could be taken to help conserve forested communities. Assisted migration, or the intentional movement of organisms to places that would increase the probability of their future persistence, has become a hot topic of debate. And the ethics of these actions prompt us to ask ourselves if humans should intervene. Should we aim to preserve our lands and manage to keep them the same, or should we accept change and let things go? Perhaps it's the end of the wild, and striving to maintain our forests to how they looked pre-colonialism is untenable. Dr. Jessica Hellman, who's the director of the Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota, explains the debate around assisted migration in our video.
We tend to think that ecosystems should be restored to how they used to be, or how they're supposed to be, or a healthy state. And there were arguments at the time about what baseline should be used, or how humans have manipulated ecosystems historically. But when you change the climate, that baseline isn't relevant anymore. You can't go back to how this, in many cases, you wouldn't be able to go back to how the system used to be or was supposed to be.
In other words, human-induced climate change has irrevocably altered the planet. We've hit the point where instead of simply asking if or when we should get involved in moving or saving a species, we have to ask harder questions. We have to make pragmatic decisions about what is worth saving and why. And then we probably do have to intervene.
There's not a hands-off, do no harm. There's allow the climate change to proceed and do nothing, or try to intervene and also bear the consequences and the cost of that intervention. Those are the choices that climate change is presenting.
National parks are asking these questions and making these decisions now with the help of Jessica and her colleagues. They recently put together a workbook to help the Park Service think through the risks and benefits of managed relocation. It recommends asking why we want to move a species. Are we saving it because we like looking at it, or because it's critical to an ecosystem?
A lot of it has to do with ecology, of course. Can you move them? How would it work? But a lot of it does not have to do with ecology.
There are questions of resources, money, buy-in from stakeholders, from local governments, lumber producers, and hikers. What land is even available for the species to be moved to? Would someone sue? Indigenous perspectives are incredibly important too.
If you are associated with a place, or you have rights in a place, and you have cultural resources that you have been granted, climate change then becomes essentially another form of colonization. And I think that's an important value for all of us to understand and pay attention to.
Of course, managed relocation does not address the root problems facing forests. It's a treatment of symptoms. At the end of the day, the best way to protect biodiversity is, you guessed it,
we should just stop emitting greenhouse gases. That would be the more cost-effective and smarter way of going about doing this.
We need bigger actions because simply relocating trees may not be sufficient.
The idea that we're going to manage or conserve biodiversity by moving things around one by one is just not good enough. Humanity depends on the preservation of most things that are living on this earth. We need them. And moving them around is probably not going to get the job done.
Is this causing any drama with the bird researchers?
No, it has not. I've been lucky enough not to shoot down any wildlife, which is very fortunate. Fortunate indeed. So a conclusion could be drawn to say that no one effort will be the magic key to creating a climate resilient environment until we ensure that our approaches are integrated to maximize the positive effects on ecosystems, which will have a positive effect on all living things. So for example, this flow diagram shows the relationships between adaptations to land management for biodiversity, ecosystem-based adaptations for people, and ecosystem-based mitigation. Negative impacts of climate change are shown in dark gray, and positive responses are shown in green. And it will be the gamut of reforestation efforts, forest creation, river and wetland restoration, protection and expansion of natural, semi-natural areas, increased habitat or landscape connectivity, and some species translocating, and a natural fire regime being restored to have benefits for ecosystems, which in turn will help thwart climate change. So 2 examples of mitigation strategies underway include recommendations proposed by a statewide committee of experts on climate-oriented management strategies that would optimize carbon sequestration of Massachusetts forests, where I'm currently located. I recommend anyone interested in this topic to read this report of the Climate Forestry Committee. And this came out in 2024. This committee was made up of 12 distinguished scientific experts to develop recommendations for the climate-oriented forest management guidelines as part of the effort to help Massachusetts achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And the key elements of the guidelines really focus on keeping forests as forests and focusing on passive management strategies to realize older forests and increase carbon stocks. But guidelines on wood production, habitat biodiversity conservation, and even soils and water management are also summarized within the report. A second example centers around environmental justice in urban areas. So in 2021, the city of Holyoke in Massachusetts worked to create a comprehensive strategy for protecting and expanding its city's trees. The urban forest equity planning process included a public tree inventory to learn more about their existing urban canopy, and a series of public forums and other activities to better understand community priorities of Holyoke's trees. The pull to do this was to really mitigate climate change impacts, such as flooding, air pollution, and high summer temperatures on the most vulnerable communities. So solutions include increasing the number of trees to make cities more livable, to reduce temperatures, which is caused by the heat island effects, improve human health, reduce stormwater runoff, and also improve water quality. The top 5 species in the 4 neighborhoods that were shown in the previous slide are Norway maple, which make up approximately 12% of the population of trees in the city of Holyoke. Honey locust makes up about 11%. Green ash makes up about 9%, and Callery pear makes up about 7%. Little leaf linden makes up about 6%. So the industry guidelines actually recommends that a single species should compose no more than 10% of the tree population in a city or an environment to reduce species susceptibility to pests and diseases. So you can see here, Norway maple and honey locust exceed the recommended 10% threshold. Therefore, when planting new tree species, Holyoke is looking to plant species that are less common but suitable for growing in Holyoke's climatic conditions, with a preference towards Massachusetts native tree species where appropriate. So what are some strategies that anyone or you can do locally or in your backyard to help create sustainable landscapes? So the first type of gardening to consider is xeriscaping. Xeriscaping is landscaping with slow-growing, drought-tolerant, and native plants to conserve water and reduce yard trimmings. And the practice of xeriscaping will vary from region to region due to variation in climate throughout the states. Grass cycling is the natural recycling of grass by leaving clippings on the lawn when mowing. Grass clippings decompose quickly and release valuable nutrients back into the soil. And this will reduce water and fertilizer usage and green waste generation, as well as maintenance costs. And in even the smallest space, you can create a habitat that encourages birds, pollinators, and other wildlife to thrive. Planting with natives in your home garden can act as a bridge connecting wildlife to nearby wildlands. Effective and sustainable landscape designs reduce water usage and cost. So this can be achieved in many ways, such as selecting water-efficient plants, irrigation systems, or applying compost and mulch. And of course, rain gardens are a great example of how design can reduce flooding and filtering of polluted rain runoff from streets or hard surfaces. Preserving the amount of carbon in an ecosystem is a great way to help combat a changing climate. Reducing the amount of tillage done to the soil helps inhibit carbon release into the atmosphere. Of course, application of compost and mulch enhances soils by adding organic matter. Mulch will insulate plant roots, reduce weeds, minimize water loss, and control erosion, dust, and mud problems. Decomposition of mulch helps condition the soil and it adds nutrients as well. And adding organic matter increases the water holding capacity of soils, reducing erosion and conserving water. And of course, if you're in areas with high clay soils, you probably know they are naturally low in organic matter. Compost improves the texture of these soils so water can infiltrate more easily, reducing runoff and saving that water for plants. And there are many ways to make your own compost at home that I'm sure you could find great resources for that at your local library. And with that, using compost to control erosion is also a best management practice, as compost bonds tightly with soil, leaving no gap between soil and cover, which means less opportunity for water to run underneath and undermine the protection that it provides. So other things that you can do is refer to the updated USDA plant hardiness map for your area to determine which plants are most likely to survive the coldest winter temperatures in the area that you're wanting to plant in. However, as warmer weather patterns become more common, it's important to consider the balance of local ecosystems and avoid pushing out native flora. So for example, warmer winters could lead to an increase in pests and invasive plants. So planting native is super important to maintain biodiversity of an ecosystem. So with that, I will conclude here. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions or sharing of experiences or observations when it comes to sustainable landscapes.
Thank you, Angie. That was fabulous. I'm just checking the chat right now. I got a comment that your sampling technique is incredible. Wow.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of it.
How did you become involved in this work, and is that shotgun sampling your own technique, or did you learn it from somewhere else?
That's a really great question. Yeah, so how did I get involved in this type of research? I was lucky enough to meet a fantastic mentor of mine, Dr. Kevin Griffin, who's a professor at Columbia University. He's a plant ecophysiologist, does a lot of work in the Arctic, but also around the world, just looking at plant physiology and the environmental conditions that can affect it. And when I was a grad student, we would meet, I believe weekly for lab meetings. And I actually, at that point, I didn't really have a focus on what research I wanted to do. But I read that paper that I showed earlier that was talking about these plants are possibly committed to extinction. And that just, I was like, that boggled my mind that the percentage values were so high. And I started to think about what was actually happening in my backyard, in New York. And luckily enough, Black Rock Forest, where I did my study, is part of the research forest that Columbia is part of a consortium that uses that forest for education and research. And they also had these long-term data sets on the species replacement. And I was like, I could actually figure this out right here. And so I did. And I wanted to approach it through the ecophysiology lens. So that's when I was able to take the fancy machine called the Lycor, the portable photosynthesis machine, which costs as much as probably a Kia, and do some experiments and expose these plants to different temperatures and see what they're doing. And found some interesting results. And I was able to have fun with an interesting technique that was not invented by me. My mentor, Dr. Griffin, also used the shotgun in his PhD research, I believe, and many others before and since. I just took the opportunity to brand myself as the shotgun scientist. So, yes.
I've got a comment from an attendee. Wonderful presentation. Great to see a young scientist working to understand optimized climate impact on forests and optimize health of forests. Thank you, Dr. Patterson.
Thank you.
Question: when you were doing your study in Black Rock, and you were, and I might be getting this wrong, but realizing that it doesn't necessarily make sense to keep the trees that have always been there, like the new things, what in the big picture, what does that mean? Do we just let things I know we can do things on a small scale, but on those big
Yeah,
scales with the big forests and the big, like,
yeah,
did we just
yeah.
let things other than what we can do in our own little world, let things just go?
That is the
I
question of
guess
the
that's the
century.
that's the question that nobody really has a great answer for, I guess.
Right. I mean, that's the question of the century. It's we see patterns, we see a lot of shifts changing, and it's not just with plants, it's with animals as well, general migrations, and we also see the consequence of those, those shifts happening where, flowers are opening up earlier than pollinators can get to, um, or food sources being, kind of missed. There's a missed opportunity to grab, uh, food sources for migrating birds, so to speak. And so, yeah, the science behind it is all about understanding what's happening, why is it happening, and can we slow it down? At this point, of course, there are individuals, institutions, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions that are doing research on, how do we save these economically important species, that we depend on, that is important for um, crops, right? Important for the food that we buy, or even the medicines we depend on. Um, I think that's where a lot of the science comes in, working with genetics, kind of like maybe making more climate resilient plants or disease resistant plants happen. Um, there's efforts to, I would say University of Vermont is actually doing some work on what to do with sugar maples, right? It's like there's a lot of maple syrup that comes out of this northern region, but um, the maples are also migrating upward, and that can have a huge impact. And so, doing, they're seeing if it's even possible to be able to translocate, you know, um, maybe plants that are trees that are more tolerant to warming temperatures, or just maybe migrate them upward and see if they can establish themselves. But yeah, it's I think it's going to be a hard battle if we try to kind of do like a piecemeal approach,
Mhm.
and we really have to look at our changing our behaviors as a whole world, and really try to reduce the carbon emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions, as was stated in the video, to really slow things down. But plants will, like I said before, plants have migrated for thousands of years. They will probably be here, long after us. They were
Yeah.
here before us. It's just the makeup of what we see outside may look vastly different from when your great grandchildren will be looking at a forest. And the important questions around uh, justice is I think is really important. You know, the communities that are going to suffer the brunt of climate change. How can we make sure that they have equitable access to resources that we benefit from? Not too long ago, India, you saw there was a huge flood in the Himalayan village, that really killed a lot of people a couple days ago, and I read that it was the melting of a huge megaton glacier, that did so. So communities, are being affected by this, and yeah, trying to slow it down is going to be very important.
I have a question. Are the regional ecosystems map expected to change more rapidly over the next 30 years?
Great question. 30 years, I would say so. I mean, that hardiness zone map was a span of 10 years. Um, Not too long ago, maybe last month, they deemed New York as now a subtropical climate. And we feel it over the summer. It was pretty humid and hot. And yeah, I could see these maps probably changing faster than slower, for sure. If not the same, but maybe faster.
What is your everyday work now? Are you postdoctorate work? Are you like, what's your day job?
What's my day job? Karaoke singer on the weekends. But no, I'm right now curator of education and outreach for the Miller Worley Center for the Environment at Mount Holyoke College. I worked at Black Rock Forest for a couple years from 2020 to 2022 and came into this position in 2022. I'm doing very similar things that I did at the forest, where I would actually engage with teachers and faculty to come up with experiential learning activities that they can do with their classes outdoors. So at the forest, I took a lot of K through 12 students outside and do a lot of lessons. But now that I'm at a college campus, I do it with the college students, and we use the campus as a living laboratory. And it's a beautiful campus. If anybody's ever makes it up, let me know and I can give you a tour.
Thank you for sharing the relevant and necessary work you're doing. I have enjoyed your presentation, and so have I.
Thank you.
So I think I'll wrap it up. I don't see any other questions. Angie, thank you so much for the interesting presentation. Thank you everybody for attending. And everybody have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.